This is the 11th annual Louisiana Book Festival. I'm in the House Chamber right now, but the festival encompasses many rooms in the state capitol and the state library and all along 4th Street, and it's another beautiful day. We've had 11 years of beautiful weather for the book festival, so this is a charmed event. The Louisiana State Library is the sponsor of the event, and they created it 10 years ago, and this is the 11th. This will be the 11th festival, and it's to celebrate literature, celebrate the book, and celebrate Louisiana writers. We have a great number of Louisiana writers who participate, but it's not limited to authors from Louisiana, but there's all about poetry, all about literature, fiction and nonfiction. There's music, there's food. It's truly a Louisiana festival, but it focuses on literature.
What are the highlights of this year's festival?
The Louisiana Writer Award that we're about to present to Darrell Bork. Another interesting piece is that the artwork for our festival this year is the Louisiana Legend painting by George Rodrigue, who was a good friend of the festival. So we're kind of doing a little homage to him as a long-term friend of the festival. But we've got music all day, back-to-back from 10 o'clock till the end of the day. Rick Bragg's going to be here talking about his biography with Jerry Lee Lewis. We've got James Carville, Cokie Roberts is here today, so we've got a nice lineup.
Please welcome the winner of this year's Louisiana Writers Award, former poet laureate and great Louisiana ambassador for literature, Darrell Bork.
Thank you, Lieutenant Governor Jay Dardenne and State Librarian Rebecca Hamilton, for this honor you extend to the art of poetry through me. Thank you both for your public service, which creates environments that foster and deepen the cultural and intellectual life of the citizens of Louisiana. And thank you, Jim Davis, for the sustained poetry programming at the festival and for the library programs you create every year during National Poetry Month. It pleases me greatly to receive this award at the same time the festival is honoring an artist who's not only a state treasure, but a national and world treasure as well. George Rodrigue has done as much as any writer, sculptor, musician, or food artist to let the world know about the magic in this little piece of geography he lived and worked in his whole life. Along with his Jolie Blancs and Evangelines, with his ancestors and his various manifestations of Tiffany, he celebrated the acknowledged legislators as well as the unacknowledged legislators who come to us in the form of the writer, the storyteller, and the poet. So we see in George's long view the Longs and Edwin Edwards alongside Ernest J. Gaines, Walker Percy, and Shirley Ann Grau. Kathleen Blanco alongside Isaac Bashevis Singer, Gus Weil, James Carville, and Sophie Freud. Bobby Jindal, Jimmy Davis, Ronald Reagan, and Mikhail Gorbachev alongside Robert Coles, Bruno Biedelheim, and John Kennedy too. George Rodrigue loved this state, its darkness and its light, its resilience and its vulnerability, everything in it from trees to its beloved dogs, its madmen and its wise women, its festival spirit and its death rituals and practices. He loved and supported the Louisiana Festival of the Book because he knew how valuable our narratives are, whether they come to us in the form of poems or paintings or stories. He knew on some level, deeper than most, the value of what we keep in our libraries, public and private, congressional as well as the libraries of our dreams. He knew that art is an act in which nothing is trivial and everything is tender. It's an humbling experience. The writer writes in isolation and writes in solitude, and most of the life of a poet is a really quiet life. And to be brought into a chamber like this, to be brought into a festival like this, with people milling around you and recognizing you is a sort of new experience.
Life is a sum total of numbers. No, it's not. Because we do something that no one else in the country does. We don't live in a place, we live in a culture. We live in an identifiable culture. We have our own food. We have our own music. We have our own funerals. We have our own social structure. We have our own architecture. We have our own body of literature. Everything that you think of, if you think of Italian culture or Jewish culture or Japanese culture, everything that a culture embodies, we have that. No one in the world ever went to an Ohio restaurant to listen to organ music. Just what I thought a remarkable culture we have here in South Louisiana, and you know how much I've come to appreciate it, and sharing some stories with people.
Tell us a little bit about what you mentioned, the loss of the French language in Louisiana and the ramifications that brings.
Well, I mean, you know, what the point is that we didn't know when we were doing it, and we allowed it to kind of slip away from us to a large extent, and getting it back is trying to get lightning in a bottle. But a lot of people are working hard to preserve that culture, and we should give them credit. And I think my message is the next generation shouldn't make the mistake my generation did and let this slip away from us somewhat.
What does the French culture mean to Louisiana?
Well, it means it's our traditions, it's our food, it's our music, it's our love of family, it's our joie de vivre, it's all the things that go into sort of making us who we are, and it also makes us different, which is really sort of important. We would like to refer to it as we're comfortable with our otherness.
My message is change is certain, progress is not. And we have to concentrate on what it is that we want to have in our lives going forward. And what we have in Louisiana, in New Orleans, all Louisiana, upstate, downstate, is worth preserving and building on. And that's what the book is about. And people did it. It's not an anti-government book. It's a pro-people book. It's pro-everybody getting together to assure progress because they love their heritage.
My newest book is a biography of Jerry Lee Lewis. I think it was time for Jerry Lee to tell his own story, and I was lucky enough they picked me.
What did you learn about Jerry Lee Lewis that the public may not know?
One thing, he was a whole lot nicer than I expected him to be. But no, Jerry Lee's got a million stories. He really did make Elvis cry. He really did turn over 1,000 Cadillacs. You know, he was there at the birth of rock and roll. No way that book could be dull.
We wanted to take the next step in the Solomon Northup story. And my mother, in the 1980s, created what was called the Solomon Northup Trail. And it consisted at that time of 18 sites, and these were the sites that Solomon described in his narrative. But there was, you know, the story didn't have the public exposure that it does today. And there was only modest interest in the trail. And as the years went by and I would go back home over the last 30 years, those signs became rusty and sort of eyesores because nobody visited. Ultimately, a lot of them were taken down. But of course, all that changed last year with the movie. And so with the help of a group called Kisatchie Delta and the Voiles Parish and Rapides Parish Tourism Commissions and Lieutenant Governor Dardenne, the trail has been given a rebirth, and we produce what we call the Solomon Northup Trail Guide, and it's an app. And it sort of marries technology with history and Solomon's narrative, and it's unique. We studied a lot of apps for all the cities and to understand, you know, what we could do to make this one special. And so it's narrated by Lou Gossett, and it starts in Alexandria where Solomon got off the boat, and it winds its way down in the same order as the story is told by Solomon, through the Ford Plantation and the Epps Plantation, and ultimately in Marksville where Solomon was freed. And it has historic images, it has descriptions. Lou tells a story in Solomon's words in relation to those specific sites when you're at the site. And so it allows you to immerse yourself in the story, and it's unique. You know, in my mom's day, of course, there's no such thing as an app, and so they had, and there wasn't much money around, so they had a small pamphlet, a trifold, with a bunch of fuzzy, grainy pictures and descriptions. And, you know, again, with technology and the team that, you know, of our team today, and working with the people like Steve McQueen and Lou Gossett and these guys, You know, we've been able to attract a lot of really good talent and put together something special. And we're using, you know, again, current technology to produce almost like a museum guide, if you will, you know, for these sites. It's just like any app. Go to your iPhone and go to the App Store, download it. It makes this trail meaningful. Otherwise, the trail consists of, you know, farmland and houses and things, but when you have the story told, you know, and it wraps everything in, it puts things in context, and it's multimedia, it's well worth it. My mother, she spent a lifetime authenticating the story, and she wanted, of course, you know, to get the story out and expose people to the story. And she, in the story primarily, through her book that she, from 1968, ended up in college, you know, college bookstores, but it was very limited in its exposure. And when the movie came out, you know, we have a website. It's, in fact, it's 12yearsaslave.org. But you spell out the word 12, and 12yearsaslave.org. And we've had this, you know, enormous number of people that have written, and in fact, a lot of people ask, you know, where are these places? We'd like to see them, and that was another inspiration for the site. But Steve McQueen has an initiative working with Penguin. It's not my mother's book, but it's just the original narrative to put it in the hands of every high school student. I'm sure he'll talk about that tomorrow.
Hey, little Red Riding Hood, you mind taking this basket of food over to your grandfather's house, because you know he's not feeling too good, you know? So she says, I'll be happy to, Mother, and she put on her little pink cape. And she grabbed the basket of food, and she skipped out the house, and on the way down there, standing on the corner, was this big, mean, ugly-looking giraffe. He must have been 18 feet tall.
I've just been walking through the tents, looking at everything and seeing all the different kind of books about Louisiana. It's pretty interesting. Some are pretty kind of small and obscure and kind of interesting to see what people are doing that you have no idea about if you don't come down here and look at it.
I drove here in New Orleans my wife belonged to a book club, and we are having a book club meeting today, and we came here to see about this festival.
What do you think of it so far?
It's very great. I think there's a lot of things to see and a lot of information that you can get from here.
We just got here, so we're just kind of walking around, seeing what they have to offer here for the kids, for school.
I see you and the kids are in costume.
Yes, we're going to go to the Halloween parade afterwards.
What do you think of the festival so far?
It's great. It's interesting. A lot of good booths, a lot of good authors.
We have a traveling book club that includes members from New Orleans, Baton Rouge, Lafayette. And today, because of this, we were having a meeting at my home. We decided to come to the festival first. And we ended up at the festival, and then we're going to go back to my home for a book review.
What do you think of the festival so far?
I think it's wonderful. It's really, really nice. I'm sorry I hadn't heard about it before, but I've been enjoying it very much.
Came out here today because I love books. I've been to the festival in the past, and it is an absolutely gorgeous day.
What do you think about the book festival?
I think it's something that the entire area can be proud of, especially Baton Rouge.
We're here today. My son is an avid reader, and we wanted to come to see the books that the book festival has to offer, and he did wind up finding a book he liked, and we bought it at the Barnes & Noble Junior store.
What do you enjoy the most about the festival?
Oh, the people, the food, and obviously the books. The variety, and also it seems like the authors who have actually written the books are here selling their own materials.
Oh, I drove 2 hours to Baton Rouge to come to the Louisiana Book Festival, and I absolutely love it. It's just fascinating to see and hear the authors and hear their stories.
Is this the first time you've come?
No, this is about the 5th time.
Why do you keep coming back?
Books and authors and information.
It's great to be here. This is my first time at the book festival. I'm a Baton Rouge native. My name is Tim Parrish. I have 2 new books out, a memoir called Fear and What Follows, and a novel called The Jumper, part of which is set in the Capitol building and where I'm going to be reading. So that's pretty amazing. And I flew down from Connecticut. I've been up there 20 years, and it's great to be back home. My first book came out in 2000. It was Red Stick Men, and it was set primarily in North Baton Rouge, where I grew up, and it was all good things from there.
Well, if you had any advice to give to someone who's trying to write, what kind of advice would you give to a person who wants to be an author?
Well, first I'd say read, because I find a lot of young writers who aren't reading and try to make, kind of literary friends through print with people who have the same kind of objectives and writing style you do. And then it's really hard work, and devotion to craft and an openness to good response.
It's called Working Congress, and it's a product of a group of people, former members of Congress and scholars who study Congress and former congressional aides who came together for a couple of days to talk about what's wrong with Congress and how we can fix it.
And did you solve Congress?
Well, we didn't. We knew we weren't going to solve Congress, but we knew we could make some suggestions that were for reforms and changes in congressional procedure, but also the electoral system and just the way things operate in the country and in Washington that might make some incremental changes that might improve things slightly. I mean, there's no one who's going to fix Congress. But if we could just move the needle back a little bit, dial it down, and make it a little more functional, we thought we would be contributing to a stronger democracy.
The book is The 10 Rules You Absolutely Must Not Break If You Want to Survive the School Bus. And it's a picture book for the younger kids. And it's about a little boy named Kyle who's nervous in general. And his brother is trying to tell him things about taking the school bus for the first time. He's slightly terrified by the whole operation, but the brother gives him 10 rules. And in the course of the first day, Kyle breaks every one of them, mostly by accident. And so he has to deal with it. It's really a book about being afraid. And any good book about being afraid is really a book about bravery. And so Kyle has to come to terms with being afraid, and he has to make a a book has a narrative arc, and he has to come to terms with his fear and make a brave decision at the end, which he does.
It's autobiography, 2 words, and it's the story of a 57 Chevy that I traced back through 14 people who had owned it to the day it rolled off the showroom floor, and it's a fable of post-war America told through this one car and the otherwise unconnected fraternity of people who have owned it, who have shared this one ride.
And how did you come up with this idea?
I guess the short answer is that I owned a lot of really bad cars in my 20s, and would often wonder about the unfortunates who owned them before I did. And that kind of morphed over time into 20 years later, as I was sitting at my desk at a newspaper in Norfolk, Virginia, racking my brains for something to write about, I thought, it might be a good story to try to find one old car, find everybody who's owned it, and tell a bigger story through that mosaic of humanity. And I didn't know what that bigger story might be at the time, but I figured there had to be a bigger story there of some sort that would come to me once I got going. The Hollywood fictionalization of a writer's life is that you sit around waiting for inspiration to hit you, and then in a flurry of activity you crank out effortless prose, and that gets everything wrong. There's no inspiration up front. The inspiration comes with the work, and the emphasis is on the word work. I mean, it is a job just like any other career. It's, you go to work every day, and I put in your standard 8-hour day if not longer, and I'm exhausted by the end of it.
The book is a rewriting of my dissertation, so it's a revision
for a more general audience about the women's department at the Cotton Centennial Exposition in 1884-85 when suffragists came down south. Oh. Yes, first wave suffragists came and talked about voting and higher education and other rights that women needed at the time, equal pay for equal work, etc.
I wrote a book called Founding Mothers about the women of the Revolutionary period that came out in 2004. And from that time on, the publisher has been saying, children's book. And it takes a very long time to get an illustrator signed up and get the illustrations done for a finely illustrated children's book. Who knew? But Diane Good, the illustrator, who is a Caldecott winner, just has done the most marvelous illustrations. They're perfect. But it took a long time. So it's now out, Founding Mothers, Remembering the Ladies.
Well, tell us a little bit, what did you find different between doing a children's book versus an adult book?
Well, it's 100% different. I mean, an adult book is a long, highly researched, highly documented history book. Children's book is a page a woman, and you can be. It's remarkable how inclusive you can be in terms of the information, and the way the publisher HarperCollins children's books really had a notion of what they wanted, and they wanted sort of, in addition to kind of a biography of each woman, little incidents from each of their lives. And it works. Who knew?
It's called The Radical Fiction of Ann Petrie. She was the first African-American woman to write a novel to sell 1 million copies. She was a contemporary of Richard Wright, James Baldwin, Ralph Ellison, 40s, 50s, but she hadn't gotten nearly the kind of attention they've gotten. So hopefully my book will, bring her wider readership and an audience for important books that she wrote. I found out about her when I was an undergraduate. She wrote this one story called Like a Winding Sheet, and it's always anthologized. But other than that, there never was really much written about her, or her work was not widely known. But when I got to graduate school in Chapel Hill, I took a seminar in African American literature, and I discovered that she wrote 3 novels. And so in that class, we actually read 2 of her novels. So at that point, I really became enamored of her work. And actually, as a graduate student, I published an article on her. And then much later, I actually decided, well, she deserves a much more scholarly attention. So I decided to write a book about her.
Was there anything you learned about her you didn't know before?
I learned that that her family and the rich history of her family, and even though she's from Connecticut, her family has a really rich Southern background. I'm from Virginia, so that really resonated with me. Her great-great-grandfather was actually a slave in Virginia who escaped and came to Connecticut, and that's how the family got to Connecticut. So being a native Virginian, that really sort of spoke to me.
My book is called Acalia and the Swamp Monster, and I'm a visual artist. I'm a painter and a painting professor at LSU, and my work has always been narrative, kind of metaphorically narrative, and I thought, what if I started with a narrative text as a catalyst for a body of work, and then decided to start with myself, so I wrote an autobiographical kind of adult fairy tale, and then used that as a starting point for a body of artworks. And then the book was published by LSU Press, combining the artworks with the narrative text.
And the book kind of took over your life?
Yes, it was years of work getting to this point. And right now, the book was published in April by LSU Press, and there's an exhibit of the artworks that just recently opened at the LSU Museum right down the street. So this is the culmination of something that I dreamed of, actually starting in about 2007. Wow. I first got the idea on a trip to Italy, looking at image cycles, and thought, what if I made a body of work that surrounded the viewer and told a story? And then that started me thinking about it, and then gradually got to this point.
I've just published a book about New Orleans history, 30 years of New Orleans history from 1890 to 1920.
What interested you that said, I want to write a book about New Orleans history?
Oh, what didn't interest me? It's this whole period. This is the Storyville, when the Storyville Vice District was alive, and there were the rise of jazz. All of these things just really attracted me. I've made something of a specialty of the early 20th century in history. I write a lot of urban history, and there was no place more interesting than New Orleans in that part of the century.
But you're not from Louisiana, so I was just curious as to why that. What on all your travels and thoughts and everything, why New Orleans?
Well, I'm from Washington, or I live in Washington, D.C. I was originally from New Jersey, which are pretty colorless places. So I think the natural color of New Orleans and Louisiana generally brings me down here. I'm really attracted to that. Since I'm a nonfiction writer, I can give nonfiction advice, which is find some subject that you're passionate about and that you would be willing to get up early in the morning to work on, because you're going to have to get up early in the morning to work on it. Yeah, I would just say that you have to find your subject.
I'm here with my latest novel, Life After Life.
Oh, okay. Tell us a little bit about that novel.
Yeah, it doesn't sound very cheerful, but there's more humor in it than it will sound. But it really is a take on kind of that last stretch of life. One of the prominent characters is a hospice volunteer, so it really is a lot about end of life and how it's not over till it's over. You know, I sort of ventured into nursing home terrain. But giving life to the people who are there, both their histories and how they're interacting in the present. And they're younger characters too, but it really is more a celebration of life and how, you know, my notion that we are our memories. So it's really a novel about memory. The idea was there 20 years ago when I was with my dad as he was dying. And I was just so, well, it just changed my life, because I think as a young person, you believe that life will yield for hard times, and it doesn't. And so, you know, it's very possible to be sitting by the bed of someone dying while you're also paying bills, fixing lunch for your kids, reading student manuscripts to go back and critique the next week. And I was just struck by all of those things happening at once. I was struck by the selflessness and wonderful generosity of the hospice volunteers. I was struck by what is the miraculous kind of process of death as the body protects the heart and slowly shuts down. And I was struck by my dad's own response to it all and how he kind of straddled between the two worlds. And I was always very aware, wondering, what on earth is he thinking? And so in this novel, I allowed myself the privilege to try and enter the thoughts of people as they're leaving. And because I think at the end we are our memories, and what people have left of us are basically what we've done and the memories and stories that we've given back.
It's called Modern Baptist, and it was the first novel that I published, and it takes place in a fictional town in the Florida parishes here. No, it doesn't correspond to any one town, but it's an amalgamation of different towns there. And since publishing that book, I have published 9 books that revolve around this area of Louisiana, and also with some people who went up to New York City and tried to get into different professions up there from Louisiana.
It's a great honor, and I have found it is very, very busy. I'm in halfway through my second year. It's a 2-year appointment, And I've been all over the state, which is quite wonderful, and gotten to know people and things I never would have gotten to know. And it's very good work. It feels valuable.
Well, being poet laureate, I'm sure you had an idea in your mind what it would be about. What's different about it than you thought?
I didn't realize there would be so many opportunities to see people in rural areas and in odd little parts of the state I never heard of. I found that nobody knows what a poet laureate is, but they all want to see one. I do a lot of workshops here and there. When somebody calls me and asks me to do a reading, I'll say, yes, I would like to do the reading, but give me some more gigs. I want to work in schools, I want to work in libraries, I want to do workshops for people. So if I'm in places like very rural parishes, the public library in a rural parish is often kind of the center of culture of the whole parish. Oh. And I didn't know that before. Kids come there to use the internet. There might not be good internet, you know, everywhere else. They come there to use the internet, and the librarians in those parish libraries, incredibly committed, wonderful, hardworking people. And they are so happy to have somebody, they whole calendars of things that you could do that would be a brush with something you wouldn't ordinarily do. So typically I'll go, I'll do a reading one night and then a workshop. Reading Friday night, workshop half a day, Saturday. And it's just, I just think that what could be more valuable than that?
Well, many of my books are songs. My parents were avid readers and both musicians. So for me, they kind of go hand in hand, you know. So many of my books, you can sing them or you can read them. And especially for the little reluctant readers, it's a good thing, you know, if they're like, I don't really want to read. Well, let's sing it then first. And then they're reading it while they're singing.
Whatever gave you the idea that you wanted to write books with children's books?
Well, I was always writing. Like I said, my dad had a library. He was an avid reader. He had a library in our house. And I'd look at those books on the shelf and go, wow, one day I want to write those books.
Wow.
Yeah. And so one day I want my books on that shelf. And I started with children's poetry, and then songs, and then stories.
I am a product and a son of Louisiana. You know, I grew up in southwest Louisiana, Acadia Parish. You know, my life, my ancestry begins here. You know, that's who I am. Proud of it too. I currently live in California. You know, been there for almost 30 years. You know, that dates me, but it's true. And yet, you know, all my roots are here. You know, my mother, and as a matter of fact, you know, I cherish her and my family. So that, and well, to be more specific, you know, as an author, as a writer, I learned about this festival. It's my first time here. And once I discovered it, I knew I had to be here, you know, by any means necessary, you know.
Well, you're a writer, and what are you working on right now?
Historical novel, you know. I'm really a big fan of nonfiction. You know, history buff, always have been. I do a lot of research. And I completed a few projects, basically screenplays, historical pieces, and it motivates me. It's the research, the things that you discover along the way. And so I decided more recently to tackle this project, historical fiction. And, you know, it's a very special genre. You know, historical fiction requires that you do the necessary research, and the basis is all factual. And you do your fact checking, you do your research. But along the way, I mean, you have fun with it. You know, you create characters who are products of your imagination, you know, and you let that go, you know. And I'll just mention this because, you know, there are people that are sci-fi, you know, types, you know, science fiction. And I have an appreciation for it, but that's not my thing. Wherein you can delve into the history books about things that actually happened, facts, and that you can base your novels or whatever on things, events that we simply ignore rather than having to go so far out and create things that are simply the basis of our imagination. You know, history is fascinating. Just love it. You know, I just can't get enough of it.
The book that I'm featuring here is called Small Disasters Seen in Sunlight, and it's a book of poetry that's primarily sort of lyric narrative poetry. I think the reason, in fact, that I was selected at all is that I've been published in the Southern Poetry. The editors, Jessica and Faust and Mary Catherine Calloway, showed some of my work to Ava, and then Ava wrote me and asked to see a manuscript, and so it was selected to be first in her new series called the Barataria Poetry Series.
What drew you to writing to begin with?
Oh my gosh. Well, I started writing when I was 5 years old because my father, who I love very much, was a doctor and very busy. But when I would write, he would type it up for me and he would pay all kinds of attention to me. And so I thought, this is a way to get my father to pay attention to me. And he loved all kinds of literature. Shakespeare, he loved Ogden Nash, the poet. So I started writing poems that I thought were funny to make him laugh.
Wonderful. What do you think it takes to be a good poet?
Well, one thing it takes is a lot of discipline. And I want to say a little quote in honor of Galway Kinnell, who died yesterday, who is one of the great poets of our time. I was talking to him once and told him that I felt very guilty about writing because it took time away from my young kids. I said, "Can you help me with that, Mr. Kinnell?" And he said, "Well, I'll tell you why I write." He said, "I write because I have a burden of feeling, and I need to lay my feelings down one poem at a time." So I think it helps to have a lot of feeling about things, and I think it helps to have a lot of discipline as well.
I'm David Johnson. I'm the editor of Louisiana Cultural Vistas magazine, which is the quarterly magazine of the Louisiana Endowment for the Humanities. We're a big sponsor of the Louisiana Book Festival, and our magazine is celebrating 25 years in print, and we're thrilled to be able to celebrate that here among this great gathering of writers and readers all across Louisiana, the true literati of our state.
So you are going to be a presenter tomorrow?
Yes, and we're going to have 3 contributors to the magazine speaking. Sally Asher, who's written some stories for our issues about the Mascot newspaper, a notorious antebellum newspaper in New Orleans and also during Reconstruction era. Matt Sekakini, who's a music historian. He's going to talk about the history of the brass band tradition in New Orleans and a little bit of controversy about recent noise ordinances in the city and how that applies historically. Actually, the very earliest days of New Orleans, believe it or not, people were complaining about noise in the city. Is that music or noise? And of course, that debate continues to this day. And we'll also have Ben Sandmel, who has been our longtime music reviewer. He's going to talk about a book he's written on Ernie Cato, one of the great R&B legends of New Orleans, and the full span of the music heritage of Louisiana. From the Louisiana hayride to the blues tradition here in Baton Rouge, of course, Zydeco and Cajun music, and all the great sounds, or noise, of New Orleans.
The book that I'm here for at the Louisiana Book Festival is called Anna Dressed in Blood. It's a young adult horror story, kind of a ghost hunter versus killer ghost tale, perfect for Halloween. Perfect. And it's being awarded the Louisiana Reader's Choice Honor, which is fantastic.
Whatever gave you the idea to write this book?
Actually, I just come off my master's degree, and I was writing a lot of literary fiction. But when I was growing up, I always read things that were just loaded with, violence and horror, and that's what I enjoyed when I was a kid. Stephen King, Bret Easton Ellis, and I really missed writing something with blood and guts. There's nothing like describing entrails steaming in the morning. So, Also, I really wanted to play whatever Silent Hill game was coming out at the time. I think it might have been 4, but no one would play with me because it was too scary. So I wrote Anna instead.
Wow. And did it turn out exactly how you thought it would, or did it go someplace else?
Well, in a way, I don't really plot my novels. I start out with characters and a concept, and I just kind of let them go. So on one hand, it turned out just the way that I'd hoped, but on the other, it's set in Thunder Bay, Ontario, which I went up and did location research. It's a fabulous place, very haunted. But I thought that Lake Superior was going to play a major role in the novel. That's part of the reason I set the novel there, and it turns out it played no part at all. So
wow.
It does. They go wherever they want.
Well, since you're a new author, tell us a little bit about how would you advise a new author who wants to write books?
Well, the first thing is, of course, to, write something that, focus on the writing. Don't get caught up, if you're just starting out, don't get caught up on the business side of it. Don't start thinking ahead to agents and what the market is doing and publishers and contracts. Just immerse yourself in the story that you want to be telling and shut out everything else. Because at the moment that you're starting out, that's the only thing that really matters, is telling it right.
Being raised in Baton Rouge in an adoptive home, when my biological mother contacted my adoptive parents and said, "I'm your son Gary's birth mother," it was like I hit the jackpot. Because here in Louisiana, the adoptions were closed and sealed back in the 70s. So although I wanted to know who I was and why I didn't look and talk and act like a Stewart, there was always something missing in me, a personal identity crisis that lasted for 40 years. So when my mother came looking for me, I knew I had to find my father. And that began the journey that I never dreamed. You know, they say sometimes truth is stranger than fiction. You can't make this stuff up. When I realized who my father was and the antics and the headlines that my parents made, and I ultimately made here as an infant abandoned in Baton Rouge, my family told me, "You can't afford not to write this story. This is a story the world will want to know."
But you weren't a writer to start with, so when you started the book, did you get help? Did you learn how to write, or was it just so compelling of a story it kind of wrote itself?
It wrote itself through the emotional turmoil that I went through on my journey of discovery. But as I closed that manuscript and tried to get a publisher, I realized that, "Gary, you're just an electrical engineer, you're not a writer." So divine intervention, happenstance, whatever you want to call it, Susan Mustafa, who is an award-winning journalist and has written several books here about Louisiana true crime stories, just happened to cross my path one day. And I said, "I've got a story. Will you help me with it?" And she took that manuscript to the beach, and she came back after the weekend, first thinking, "This guy's got to be crazy." and the next day we went to work together.
Well, since you've taken us this far, you will have to explain who your father was so that everybody out there will know. So just explain what you discovered at the end of your story.
I was told in originally searching for my father that my father had a criminal record, and there was information in his file that was so heinous that it would destroy me. And I knew my father was convicted and served time for statutory rape of my mother, criminal neglect, abandonment, and abuse of me as an infant. So what could be more heinous? So you think maybe murder? But my journey led me to find out that my father was the still at large America's most infamous and notorious serial killer, the Zodiac Killer.
How has it changed your life to know this? Because 20 years ago you didn't know it. So how has it changed your life since you've gone through this process? Because I know it must be something inside you that you're wondering, whatever made me decide to do this?
I get asked that a lot, but the reality of my story on both sides, on my side and my father's side, is nature versus nurture. I was raised in a loving, forgiving, honest, everything goes home. My father didn't have that good fortune that I did, and my father was not, I don't believe, a natural born killer with a genetic deformity. He was raised to have his disrespect for women and his mother and my mother. So just as my story is a wonderful success story for all abandoned foster children. I was a foster kid for 2 months. Success story of nature versus nurture. My father was on the other end of the spectrum, that he started out as a very normal child and ended up, because of his nurturing, becoming something evil.
My background as the poet laureate, I had the distinction of being named poet laureate by 2 different governors. Kathleen Blanco named me poet laureate in 2007, I think it was, and then Governor Bobby Jindal named me in 2009. The work as the poet laureate is amazing work, because the job is not defined. And so you can pretty much do whatever you want to do. And my initiative was to go into community centers and libraries and the pre-college classroom. And so I got to travel all over the state. When teachers realized that that was available to them, I got invited to little towns that I had never been in before, and just had a wonderful 4 years as the poet laureate.
I know some people might be interested in, how does one get named poet laureate of a state? What did you do previously to get that distinction?
Well, the poet laureate of the state is named for a body of work, and so you don't get the citation by by producing a particular book. It's not affiliated with any specific work that you've done, but just the work that you've done as a poet over a lifetime. And so by the time I was named poet laureate, I think I probably had about 4 books of poetry. And I had been a university teacher all of my life, and run a creative writing program. And so I knew many of the writers in the state.
Well, tell us, what do you think of the book festival here in Louisiana?
I think the book festival is one of the great events that we have in the state of Louisiana. We're so proud in the state to celebrate everything from oil to shrimp to sweet dough pies and so forth. And the fact that there's a festival that acknowledges that writing and the contribution that writers make to the culture is important, is in turn important to us as writers.
People that come to your reading tend to be people who somewhere else have read your work and particularly want to come hear you. And when you're a writer, you are basically alone most of the time. This is not true of the poet laureate. But when you're a writer, you're holed up in your studio. You probably go out to teach, but you come up and you hole up again. You write something down, you send it off, maybe it gets published. That's kind of outside your control. And then you never know whether anybody reads it or not. Sort of like sending paper boats down a river.
You don't know if anybody finds them.
Right. But at something like this, here come all these people and they'll say, I've followed all your books. I keep one by the bed. They say that kind of things. And to me, it's like, I'm not alone, there's a reason to be doing this.
I think it's just a wonderful opportunity to meet with people who are so interested in reading, in finding out about all sorts of different aspects about life in all its variety, both nonfiction, poetry, and fiction. And I always find just conversations that would happen nowhere else because of this venue of bringing together people from actually all over the country. Mm-hmm. Yes, it isn't just Louisiana. We're always getting Jim Davis and getting people from to relate to Louisiana in different ways with different perspectives. It works out so well.
We have so many writers who come from Louisiana, and it's always been a subject that writers like to talk about. Even people like William Faulkner, who weren't from Louisiana, spent time here. It seems to just sort of get into the souls of writers, and there's something about the landscape and the people and the culture that really appeals to them.
Well, I know we've had several authors who tell us they're from here, moved somewhere else, and yet they find themselves writing about Louisiana. So do you think there's anything in particular that seems to draw them back here? Is it just the culture?
But you know, I think Louisiana actually is unique in that it is one of the few states that has its own culture. It has its own music, its own food, its own traditions. Many states don't have that. So it really is almost a state unto itself. It really is very different from most places in the country, and I think that's what people like. There's a certain exotic feel to Louisiana that really is special.
I like how they incorporate children's activities. Well, you know, because I'm a children's book author and musician, so I'm focused on that. But it's for everyone, really. They have the children's craft area, the children's storytelling tent, and then their books. There's a whole book signing area for children. But then they have for the whole family. The teens have something too, and then the grown-ups.
This is a fabulous event. It's a truly wonderful representation of the state of Louisiana, my home state that I love so much. To have all of these authors, most of whom are connected to Louisiana in one way or another, come and be here at the state capitol, in the old state capitol, a fabulous building, and educate the populace about Louisiana authors and Louisiana writing and Louisiana as a center of literacy and of literature. And that's terribly, terribly important. And it's especially important at a time when we are seeing horrible, horrible cutbacks in terms of libraries, in terms of buying books, all of the things that make for this kind of literate culture. And you know, people say, why do we need libraries? Why do we need libraries? We need libraries more than ever. They are more used than ever before in human history. So at the same time that people are flooding into libraries and saying, we need you, we need your resources, we need the expertise of the staff to help us write a resume so we can hopefully get a job. We need the library for all kinds of community service reasons, but we also mainly need the library to learn and to read. And at the same time that is happening, and more and more and more people are using libraries than ever before, there are these awful cutbacks that are making it very difficult for the libraries to perform the services that they are being called upon to perform. So to have an event like this, which highlights the wonderful work of the libraries and with any luck also helps support them, is a very, very important event.
So far, I'm pretty overwhelmed by the whole thing, I have to say. And I have to say, listening to other people talk, I've been traveling this week through Louisiana, and I just love it. And I'll tell you why I love it. I'm obsessed with this idea of permeability between worlds, and I swear there is so much permeability between the past, the present, and the future, and any kind of spirit that might be walking around here in Louisiana. It's just incredible.
You know, the Louisiana Book Festival is just a wonderful, wonderful occasion. We look forward to it every year. It gets better every year, and every year you think it couldn't be better, but then the next year it is. It's just amazing what Jim Davis and Robbie Wilson and Rebecca Hamilton managed to do here. It's just an incredible event, and we are very, very fortunate to be part of it, and we always enjoy being a part of it. It's just such a special time for people to come from all over the state, from surrounding states, and we have authors coming as far as California to come to participate in the book festival. They get a chance to learn about Louisiana culture, and Louisiana gets a chance to learn about them. And it's a wonderful time of sharing words and books, and this is all about books, and that's a good thing.
I think it's terrific. And I found out that the bookmobiles, much to my glee and joy, are still alive, and I know how books shaped my life and how the women on the bookmobile helped shape my life, and the fact that we're doing this is a wonderful thing. I was glad to be part of it, and I know my wife was. Books are very important to her also.
It's a beautiful day. It's a beautiful crowd. I'm a book person. I'm not an e-reader. I like old books, new books. I read a book almost every day, and both of my children had difficulty reading. They had processing issues when they were little, so I taught them how to read by reading Dorothy Parker to them. So my oldest one, who's now a poet. She's a poet. She has a 4.0, a second year in college. She's in all kinds of writing programs. When she was about 6 or 7, she'd walk around going, "You can lead a horticulture, but you can't make her think." She knew every Dorothy Parker thing. So I told my girls, you can have, here's a credit card. You can buy any book, any music you want, and the rest will negotiate. So that's my message. Read, and there's lots of readers.
As far as I'm concerned, it's a crown jewel in the book world in this country. You have some of the best writers in the country. You have new people on their way up. You have children's book writers. You have historians, serious historians. No matter what you want to read, I think you'll find it in this building. And you'll hear smart people talking about that. And readers meeting writers, and writers meeting the people who give them the chance to write. I don't know anything that can be better than that in the book world.
We can't live without libraries, and that until we have a really literate society and a culture of literacy in Louisiana, we won't ever meet those benchmarks of success that we need to meet. It's just important that young people start to read very young, keep it going, read during the summer, come to the book festival, get inspired, and it's also something great about Louisiana. Our literary heritage is, unrivaled anywhere else. We have amazing people that write about an amazing state. So I want them to leave with, I want to come back next year, and what they're doing is really important.
Hopefully they'll reflect on the great literary tradition that Louisiana has. Over the decades, Louisiana has contributed some of the great authors, both fiction and nonfiction, to the world. And certainly we hope they will think about that, but also just the importance of reading and the importance of literacy in today's society. It's one of the things we struggle with in Louisiana with a high rate of illiteracy, and hopefully this provides a spark for people to recognize that we've got to make all of our citizens literate, and once they're literate, then become connoisseurs of the book.
If people have questions, like more information, what should they do?
They can go to our website at www.louisianabookfestival.org.